All right, so it's with my great pleasure to introduce our keynote, Dr. Meyerson, who is IBM's Chief Innovation Officer. He's been a number of things over the years, but currently you're the Innovation Officer, Chief Knowledge Officer. He's tasked with ensuring that the company is prepared to address and overcome technological discontinuities that occur from time to time. Such discontinuities are infrequent, such as the advent of the digital computer, the emergence of high-level programming language, mobile device technology, and so forth. But the impact of these new technologies are immeasurable, and those unprepared for these disruptive events often fail to survive the resultant business disruptions that come from the introduction of new revolutionary technologies. So really looking at market disruptors. And then to put in a more personal kind of one-on-one note, Bernie is also the person responsible for making Wi-Fi affordable. So before Bernie got involved, it was about $1,000 for the gallium arsenide chip. And then after he and his team worked on it, dropped the price by 100 times, got the chip down to $10. And that's why everybody on the planet can enjoy Wi-Fi now, thanks to Bernie. So with that, Bernie, come on up. Thanks for
Thank you, my friend. I think he just said I'm cheap.
Yeah.
We'll do our first experiment of the day and see if Microsoft comes back to life. There we go. Welcome. Just briefly to my Singaporean friends and colleagues, I've been part of the government at various levels here for decades, and I just want to express my condolences for your loss. It is really a remarkable thing that's been done here in Singapore in terms of growing a nation to the point that it has the ultimate honor of having literally been emulated by nation states throughout the world, which is really the highest form of compliment. So it is owed to your founder that that achievement was made. Now moving on to the point of the keynote, Jeff said it well, which is the world shifts rapidly beneath your feet, and if you're standing still when the world shifts, basically, give or take, half the companies that do that disappear. And we've seen that regularly. I mean, you've seen that with the advent of certainly just going over to the digital machines and bipolar from CMOS technologies. These are two technologies, one of which hit its end of life, the other of which was just getting going. And about half the companies in our industry disappeared. Huge names, DEC, I mean, they just vanished, poof. It's astounding how these discontinuities that occur result in just draconian consequences for the unprepared. Now, I could stand here and talk about all the stuff we do in security and all that. I'm sure it would make one or two of my colleagues probably out there in the audience a lot happier, but that's not my purpose in being here. What I want to talk about is some of the really fundamental changes that are coming in the world, because it's going to impact all of you and your ability, quite frankly, to deal with them. What you don't see coming isn't always a good thing. It's a bit like standing, you're going down a tunnel, you see a light at the end of the tunnel, and you're not paying attention to the fact that it's coming at you and it's actually an oncoming train. The ending is very bad. So, without further ado, let me just start at the basics. Silicon technology, and that's very cool. It's done astonishing things no matter what generation. We did the IT for the missions that went to the moon. The Apollo missions, believe it or not, we did that on 2K. For the children in the audience, K is 1,000. I have to explain it to my kids because what the hell is K? No, not G, not M, K, right? Today, of course, you can get that amount of processing power sitting in your handheld, actually 64G, putting it another way, you got about 62 million times as much capability. And the interesting thing is we safely got men to and from the moon without incident, but we can't make a stable phone call in half the countries in the world. So you do wonder what's happening. There is, however, a secondary issue. Everybody here, I presume, has heard of Moore's Law, right? Faster, better, cheaper. Real simple. Gordon Moore, who's quite the genius, said, look, every 18 months we're going to put twice as much on a chip, and this is going to be essentially what drives the industry for economic success. Very few people have ever been that accurate because that's worked for about 4 decades. However, there's another half to the story which most of you, I suspect, have not become familiar with. If you have a 1 centimeter square chip, and you put twice as much stuff on it, double the density every 18 months, and You do nothing about the power of each thing you're putting on the chip. You just put twice as many things. If you started with a 10-watt chip, 40 years later, you would have a 10-megawatt chip, which, when you turn your laptop on, would provide you with a brief, very exciting experience. Once, just once. They'd sweep you up into an urn, and we'd try again. Now, obviously, that doesn't happen because there's a second half of this, which is called the laws of scaling, written by a buddy of mine. When you make something half the size, you damn well better cut it down in a way that it produces half the power. That way, right, twice as many things at half the chip has a constant power through the years. This is no small feat. Unfortunately, it has become too small a feat with some very dire consequences. Let me explain the problem. It's a little easier if you use things people do comprehend, such as cars. If cars made the kind of progress chips have made, by 2020 you'd be getting 1 billion miles a gallon. Okay, maybe that's a little much, right? Don't think so. Now, therefore, obviously, there's a limit. Those of you who, by the way, don't believe that there's a problem with this, what you do is, if you want to make some money in the casino, you go in, you take a $1,000 bill, you put it down on the table, find somebody who's had a little too much to drink and it's a very large body and a very small brain, and you hand them a piece of paper. And you say, I'll give you the $1,000, you put your 1,000 on top of it. If you can fold a piece of paper in half 10 times, you keep the money. If you can't, I keep the money. Make sure you run faster than they do, because about the 8th fold, they're going to discover they've been had. You can't do it. You can't keep cutting things in half without really bad things happening. The same is true in technology. In point of fact, what happened is Moore's law died about 10 years ago, and most people just don't know this. It's sort of hard to admit this, but you see, faster, better, cheaper no longer work because about 10 years ago, one of the key elements in a transistor called the gate dielectric, it's an insulator. It got to 5 atoms thickness. You know what happens when you make it half as thick the next time? If you're going to go to 2.5 atoms, let me know so I can be far away because that's nuclear fission. The half atom gets really unhappy. If you're not that dim, you realize there are other problems, such as the actual device becomes so small it behaves quantum mechanically. And Mother Nature has a sense of humor, which is this device, this film, that's supposed to be an insulator, you make it half as thick and it leaks 10,000 times as much current. And the device immolates itself and we're back to the laptop that's blazing. You don't want that kind of blazing laptop. It's not a good idea. So, technology ran its course with some really funky outcomes. Now, you can actually see this if you pay attention to what's in the literature without being a rocket scientist, or in this case, a chemist. Periodic table of the elements, the first generations of semiconductors were very simple. You had silicon as the semiconductor, aluminum as the metallurgy for conducting, signal. Phosphorus and boron dope the semiconductor, oxygen you mixed with silicon to make the insulators, and hydrogen you used during the process so that if you screwed up, it made a really loud noise and your successor took over the lab. Now, not enough of you are chemists, man. We'll find out later in my Breaking Bad summary what kind of chemists you really are. From 90s to mid-2000, things didn't change that much. You added some new conducting elements, titanium, tantalum, tungsten, made silicides for conduct, basically helped the metallurgy. We went to copper from aluminum. But it wasn't a huge thing. We added germanium to make the devices go like a bat out of hell. That's, by the way, how Wi-Fi got going. But nonetheless, it doesn't look that alarming. Now watch what happened after this basic layer in the device went quantum mechanical and we had to start substituting new materials. It takes half the damn periodic chart to make a chip nowadays. Now think about it. Look at the progression. You went from this to that to this. You think there's a problem? This is why Moore's law died. If it was still alive and well, you'd be doing this. Now people have sort of perverted it and said, well, we're still making things smaller on a regular schedule. The only trouble is the way they make it smaller is not like the good old days. In the good old days, after a few steps during one generation of technology, you got about 20% more performance out of an individual transistor, and that was all you did. You made it smaller. Literally, you scaled it. The joke is today, if you simply made it smaller, starting at any one of the current generations of technology, you'd get something that cost more, went slower, and probably would catch fire if you tried to run it very hard. So what's happened is, to deal with the fact that a lot of these materials are reaching their physical limits, you have to make all kinds of innovations to get around that and spend just astonishing sums of money. In the last generation of silicon technology, to make one lousy transistor cost $2.3 billion. One. The second one was really, really cheap, but that first transistor was a killer. And, this isn't funny because that's just the experiment. Wait until you actually build a factory. That's $10 billion. So it's becoming a real race here to the bottom. It's extraordinarily difficult to continue this trend. You see, all through history, each one of the technologies, whether it was mechanical, electromechanical, vacuum tubes, discrete transistors, integrated circuits, they actually at least had successors. In other words, you went up the chain, and there was always something waiting. And the sad part is silicon doesn't have something waiting. There's a sobering thought. You see, we're reaching the point where silicon itself goes quantum mechanical at about 5 to 7 nanometers. There's this religious debate on that I refuse to get caught up on. That's it, folk. And by the way, we're at 14 nanometers now. People are spinning their first chips. So it'll go from 14 to 10 to 7. That's only 2 generations and you're done. And the benefit, by the way, is getting smaller and smaller from generation to generation. So although people keep thumping their chest and saying we're going to have more of more, good luck with that. The thing that I'm finding amusing is the way people are addressing the fact that it's so expensive, they're dropping out of the industry and finding other use. In fact, in Japan, they turned a couple of chip fabs into growing lettuce. Turns out you don't need any insecticide. Hell, the thing is sterile. You don't even have any particulate matter, much less bugs. So they actually were growing lettuce in the fab. I'm sure they charged. It's like the version of Kobe beef, but you don't have to massage the lettuce and feed it beer. The only catch with that is I don't know what you call that. Moore's law. I mean, we're gonna have to find a whole new naming convention here. In any case, you understand the point, which is when we've been counting on this sucker for give or take 40 years, the world's going to get to be very different. We will be taking other measures to drive performance. And we're entering the post-silicon era. Now, when I say post-silicon era, I know some people start ripping their hair out or writing poison letters to me. Key point is it'll all be silicon. It just will contribute nothing. That's a terrifying thought. The underlying technology, the advances in it, will be negligible. We are asymptotically going to zero. So that ain't where the progress will come from. The other thing is you get weird problems, like the speed of light turns out now to be way the hell too slow. It's another limiting factor in technology. I mean, it sounds really impressive, right? 186,000 miles a second, 300 million meters a second. In the time it takes for one of our systems to complete a full cycle, a beam of light goes about that far. Meanwhile, people think it's a good idea to build data centers that are 5 times the size of this room. You're communicating in a machine cycle that far, which means if you're fetching data from somewhere across the room, you spend about 500 to 1,000 machine cycles doing this, and then another 500 to 1,000 when it comes back. It's really unacceptable, not to mention the power it takes to communicate. There will be foundationally different architectures emerging with foundationally different software loads required by those architectures. And that's something you need to be aware of, because this community, better than any other, understands every time you put something out there that is novel, somebody comes after it. It's best that you at least know what you're going to put out there, because you can't defend what you don't know about. So without further ado, I'm going to go on to that. And, I'm going to sort of start with the trivial and work to the more exotic. The trivial, you're not going to make the speed of light any faster unless you happen to be at CERN, have trouble with your calculations, and believe that actually you picked up a factor of 1.00001. Doesn't solve the problem. So, the other thing you can do, if you can't make light faster, you better put everything together. You've already seen this. This is the obvious, right? People will take a board now, what used to be a motherboard, and they'll turn it into a system board. This is no surprise. You put everything you can on it. You do software-defined networking, so you get rid of switches, and there's lots of stuff you can do with just conventional approaches. And this is sort of now, but it's scale in after 4 decades of scale out. It's really different. Scale out is the classic Australian strategy for data center growth. You've heard this, right? It's throw another server on the Barbie. I mean, that's pretty much how that works. That doesn't work any longer because of the problems with speed. What will happen, though, over the next several generations is instead of building boards, you will actually go to the next step, which is if you take the individual chips and you thin them down to about 50 microns, right now they're a couple of millimeters, you can actually stack them, just like it's shown there, and you actually drill through on an incredibly tiny and dense scale called through-silicon vias, and you can build entire systems with 50 chips that's got everything in it: memory, networking, processing. Now, cooling this thing is a bear, and there are all kinds of challenges, but this is coming, and we already do this, by the way, in the communications sector, where you don't need quite as much density. Now, this doesn't actually drive radically different networking requirements or software requirements. It just squashes it into one factor. But one thing it does do, it eliminates all off-chip communications, and it takes the communication distances down from meters to microns, factors of 1,000,000. Please don't say, wow, it goes 1,000,000 times faster. That's not how that works. Obviously, the clock didn't pick up any speed, so obviously you might pick up a factor of 2, but a factor of 2 is huge nowadays. So the point is, you pick up a factor of 2 in performance, and you probably pick up a factor of 2 improvement also in power, because the power it takes to ship data over these distances is essentially 0. So this is one of the things that's coming, and it still won't be quite as much as a disruption of some of the next stuff. Now, I titled this The Need for Exponential Change, and there's a reason for that. It's sort of a really sobering realization that when you've gotten to the limit of technology like we have now, where silicon itself goes quantum mechanical, which means, by the way, it doesn't work anymore. At that point, we've also reached the point where big data is coming into its own. As you heard mentioned, the IoT, the Internet of Things, everybody wants to connect everything to everything else, and we all know how that's going to end, which is you get this exponential growth in data. You get laws in the United States that now say you're going to have electronic medical records. Fantastic. You do realize that you're not allowed to use compression, or it's got to be lossless, of medical images, of which you've got to store in the world today about 1 billion. Think about the requirements to handle that data. Think about the number of cameras located that you're actually acquiring data from and storing. So at the end of the day, what's happening is at the very moment that the stress on IT is becoming greatest, the one thing that's really driven IT for decades slows down to a crawl. To understand how bad it is, people love to put numbers. So I put up an exabyte. What the hell, right? 1 with 18 zeros. That's kind of the scale of data we're dealing with today. And I'll explain what that problem is. That, however, is not the obvious one. Here's the problem that should get your attention. 90% of the data in the world today was created within the last 24 months. Months. Okay, that's sobering. I think about that. The world's been around a long time, 4.5 billion years. Yeah, we weren't creating a whole lot of data back when there were bubbling volcanoes, but the hard reality is, in the last 50 years, there have been buckets of data created. In the last 10 years, we think, we've created all the data there is. The truth is 24 months. And by the way, that time is shrinking. This is called acceleration. You have this exponential growth, and you got to deal with it. So again, there's a lot of reasons that we need to drive the use of big data. Singapore has a tremendous, tremendous effort in this, as you know, in the smart city, smart society. There's a lot of work being done here, and it's for good cause. And it is not about your toaster reporting in that one of the elements are blown. When I talk about big data, there's, wow, the Internet of Things, right? I know that my toilet didn't flush right. Fantastic. There are a few other things we do with this. And I want to give you 2 examples because they required an incredible amount of work with data, but they sort of drive home why it ain't about your toaster. In 2010, the city of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil suffered just an appalling tragedy where, because of heavy rains and the fact that the favelas above the city are constructed on land that isn't necessarily stable, streets may not be paved. During massive flooding, 110 people died, thousands were displaced, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds were severely injured or missing still. The point is, the mayor stood up and said, this is ridiculous. We had no warning. We didn't know about it. We should. This is an annual event. We cannot allow this to continue. And he came to us and others, and he said, look, do something about this. This is not going to ever be allowed to happen again. So we sat down and we said, all right, first thing, you got to know the future if you want to change it. Now, that may sound like science fiction, but it is not. What we are emphasizing with the Internet of Things, the use that we make of it, is literally change the future. Know the outcome that will happen and make damn sure it doesn't if it's a bad thing. This is a very bad thing. So we built a high-precision meteorological system that basically can predict the weather accurately for about 24 hours, which doesn't sound impressive until you know the scale. It'll predict it within a square kilometer. You got to remember that in the U.S., 144 square kilometers is the weather predictions that you get off the National Weather Service. We shrunk that down to a square kilometer, and there's a reason you have to do that. If you want to know where the really bad stuff's going to happen in a city, you got to be able to predict the rainfall with tremendous precision at least 24 hours out. Then you have to take all of that data and convolve it with the data for the topography of the city in question, so you can predict where the runoff's going to go. You have to convolve that with the data on the streets to make sure whether they're paved, they're not paved, they have drains, with the data on the housing along that street, whether it's basically concrete, wooden, stand-up. You take all of that and you can actually make a fairly accurate set of predictions as to the impact of the precipitation, the flooding, the consequences of the flooding, and then, of course, you redo this until you have a very accurate set of models, which we did. And these models have been tested, by the way, in numerous cities now around the world. We don't just do it in Rio. But the point is, 24 hours in advance, we actually tell the city, get these people out of harm's way. And we can do it by block, not by city. Telling the whole city to evacuate isn't helpful. Being able to tell that, look, these 4 streets are at risk, that's incredibly helpful, and it changes the outcome. Because, yeah, you know, they're going to get washed away, but nobody dies. Nobody's hurt. You know, you can rebuild the houses, you can't replace the people. So it's important, and this is what big data is about, because you wouldn't believe the amount of data you need to do just the meteorological predictions. This is another version of it. I'll stop after this. There was a project we did called Data Baby. We did it with the Sick Children's Hospital in Toronto and the Ontario Institute of Technology. There's a phenomenon in premature infants called baby crashing. You see, when you guys, if one of you gets a cold, and Lord knows I fly on enough airplanes with hackers next to me, and not this type of hacker. When they're done hacking on me, I end up sick. The bottom line is, those folks basically, when they give you a cold, you know you got it. Why? Because you start to sniffle, you may develop a fever, because you have an immune system that's responding to sepsis. It's responding to an infection. A premature infant doesn't have that. So there are no outward signs of distress until that child's basic organs are overwhelmed. And when the sepsis overwhelms the organs, the child dies almost immediately. So that the nurses and the physicians in these wards, it makes them crazy because they'll look at the child will be healthy, 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 dead. The phenomena is known as baby crashing, and it's just absolutely a horrendous thing to encounter, and it happens frequently. So we were asked to see, is there any way we could help find what the issues are, get some early warning system. We don't know. We're not physicians. But what we did was they got 2,000 data points a second on various attributes of the child that come off every second, 2,000 a second. We kept all that data through the entire time these children were in the ward. In the horrible circumstance where a child would die, we would then back up through all that data looking for something. Because there were no alarms. It's not like their heart rate was off the charts. It was not like they had a fever. It was not like blood oxygen was off charts. It turns out, though, if you do multivariate analysis, you discover that you can correlate the correlation between blood oxygenation and blood pressure. You can similarly do correlations, for instance, between the child's health and the fluctuation of the rate of their heartbeat. Not the actual absolute value, which is in the normal range, but the rate at which it's fluctuating, and pick up signs. It turns out now 24 to 48 hours before the child is in total distress and fails, you can actually see the sepsis coming. 24 to 48 hours is a lifetime, because that means you can hit the child with massive doses of antibiotics, antivirals. They have their own downside, but if the other alternative is death, believe me, they sound like a great idea. And the fact is, children live who would have otherwise died. And this is what you do with big data. It ain't about watching your damn toaster. I mean, forgive me, I love the Internet of Things, but it sometimes misses the point. It's about this. Data, and it's a great quote from Ann Winblad, data is the new oil. I mean, this is the stuff, if you refine it, it has incredible value, but if you don't pay attention, it's worthless. So this is why we push so hard to deal with this problem of this exponentially growing data requirement. And that is why the technology we have today ain't going to cut it. So this is beginning of the era of exponential change. This is exactly what was commented. We are in an era of transition. You know, you're going to collect so much data, you can't even move it. That's an interesting problem. You go figure out the bill from AT&T Undersea to move an exabyte of data. You let me know how much you like that, not to mention how long that's going to take. Even at a couple of gig a second, forget it, ain't happening. The other problem is legally, you can't move it. You know, you go to Europe, there are 20 different sets of rules about, that's actually more than that, about moving data. You might as well forget it. Not everybody, by the way, who wants to move your data is your friend. You guys know that better than most. You know, good luck finding it and who took it. The IoT will connect everything, but is that really a good idea? You know, the Internet of Things is fantastic, but you do realize some joker is going to make the sewage pumps in New Orleans run backwards just to see, you know, for a laugh and giggle. Not a good thing. And the other problem is the model we have is wrong. The model we have for handling the Internet of Things is horrendous. Let's bring all the data to one place and analyze it. Yeah. How do you define drowning? It's I mean, okay, we're hooked everything up. Now what are you going to do with all that data when it shows up? And the answer is drown. So you have to think differently. The last one is actually a comment Jeff made, and that's a terrifically apropos one. Are we actually outrunning human ability to deal with the very complexity we create? And the answer is you're damn right we are. So now what? So with those further little challenges, I'm going to start at the bottom, and work out. You got to process the data. We are already seeing this phenomena roll out. In the top left side, the acceleration platform is really the core here. And you guys, I'm sure, must, how many of you have actually done any programming or coding using FPGAs? I'm just curious. A handful. Yeah, I'll tell you what, I'm going to ask that question in 10 years. Every hand here is going to go up. The fact of the matter is a field programmable gate array, if used correctly, has incredible accelerative capabilities against running straight code against a CPU. If you want to do something like a Black-Scholes calculation for risk analytics, you get about a factor of 10 to 100 acceleration for about 5 or 10% cost by getting off of the CPU and going to an FPGA. The problem is the programming sucks. You do it basically with RTL, or you might go to OpenCL, the more advanced languages. But we're early in its utilization. GPUs have a more mature model, but they're actually not as power efficient. The challenge here, though, is making this autonomic. The reason everybody doesn't use them, believe me, the people who use these things get huge benefit. But the problem is the programming right now is manual. We are working towards agile systems. You're going to see them develop, and they'll have all sorts of new advantages and risks and exposures. An agile system will basically run code for a period of time, then extract all the recursive algorithms, code them over to an FPGA autonomically, and then restart with just in the mainline code having a call out to the FPGA, which will run that code at several hundred times the speed it would have run otherwise. That is the idea. That is the holy grail of agile computing, and it will get here. But it's in its very early stages. It's being done manually. Now, having said that, a good example. Microsoft actually announced that in one of their data centers, what they did was they took all the algorithms that they're running for search and just moved them off the CPU onto an FPGA that's close coupled, and they picked up a factor of 2 reduction in cost for the same performance, or 2x the performance at the same cost. Take your pick. That's phenomenal. In a huge system, that is an incredible win. This is coming, but it's just at the beginning, and it's yet another place that you get advantage, but it's another place that's a soft spot people will go after. There are lots of other ways of using it in networking and database acceleration. I'm not going to crawl through them, but you get the idea. Agile computing scenarios, there will be a new software stack is going to emerge, and it'll have good news, bad news. It'll give you a lot of oomph, but it's always got its risks. In-memory everything. People love speed. Speed is incredibly important. So rotating media is slowly dying as the cost of things like solid-state drives come down. Flash is getting to be very cheap, very fast. But then you have to change the way you network to it. On the left is a traditional system using DRAM, 12 terabits, that addresses 6,000 users, about 2 gigabit per user is what we allow. And that's an in-memory database. It's actually a very, very powerful way if you want to do quick analytics on a small data set. However, on the right side is a new version of it. This is something we've done, but other people have done it in other technologies, where what we do is we take a 2U flash unit that's got 12 terabits of memory. But A, it's non-volatile, which makes it wonderful, because you can make a copy of that flash and always have an instantaneous backup that no matter what happens, it's still there. And it's got a single server. The way we get away with that is there's a coherent attached protocol interface we call cleverly CAPI, which is coherent attached protocol. Never mind. You got that part, right? I'll leave. I won't go there. Where acronyms are us, But the key point is the scaling that we've achieved just by making these changes in design are astonishing. You're talking like 24x reduction in servers. You're talking 10, 12x reduction in power, 300 or 400% savings in cost. The world is going that way. So you've gone from volatile to non-volatile designs, but in terms of security, that actually offers up some very interesting capabilities because you have ways of doing instantaneous snapshots that actually give you a rollback capability for almost nothing without a huge amount of hardware or software. So again, there's other ways that this can be leveraged. And then, of course, we flip the world upside down. Now it gets a little more exotic. For our entire history, we work as you see on the left. That's how all of us have been working. We take an input coming from storage, coming from memory. We run it by a CPU, get an output. That's pretty much the world. It's compute-centric. I will argue that within the next 5 years, we go the opposite direction to the right side, which is we become data-centric, which is to say the quantities of data we are now dealing with in the real world are so vast you can't move them, so you will have to bring the compute to the data, which means you basically have a agnostic box that you can purpose up for a particular calculation. It reaches in, acquires the data, does what it has to do, shuts back down. This addresses all kinds of problems. For instance, if you want to do an audit, and you're part of a bank located in London and you've got a bank in Malaysia, that branch in Malaysia can't send the raw data out because you can't transport that data internationally on private citizens. So what you have to do is you have to send the compute to the data, stand up a system, run the analytics, shut it down, and only send the metadata back to the host system, which is the outcome of the audit. You can do that, but that requires you to literally move the compute to the data, not the other. It's a very different way of thinking, has all kinds of advantages and bunch of exposures too. We're literally taking an architectural conversion, flipping it upside down. This is after 40, 50 years of not doing anything different. So again, another transformation. What happens if you throw everything away? Then you get magic. Damn, that worked. Son of a gun. Okay, no hands. That's took me 4 hours to practice that timing. Not really. In any case, there was a sound effect, which I didn't put on that. That's bizarre. The bottom line is you can really do weird stuff. Take my word, I specialize in that. I'll give you an example. You know, if we were architected the way computers are architected, we'd be dumb and slow. Why? Because there's a choke point. In a computer, you have storage and memory, and you have CPU, and basically you're connected by a bus. Well, that's great, except that's a hell of a choke point. Now, the really reason it's a choke point is humans have a clock frequency, give or take, organic, about a kilohertz, not gigahertz. And so with kilohertz, you better be basically architected differently or you're just not going to function. Of course, fortunately, we are. Humans are massively interleaved. If you look at the brain, of course, you've got neurons, synapses, but the interconnect level is trillions and trillions and trillions of interconnects so that it's laid out much more grid-like. So to give you an idea, we looked at this and said, why don't we re-architect a system to be neurosynaptic, very much like a human. Now, we can't do millions and millions and millions and trillions, whatever, of interconnects. But what we can do is when we lay them out on a grid, run them asynchronously. There is no clock. You only do things when you have to do something. And take a look at what implications that would have. But you have to then redesign the entire way you build a system. So that's what we did. This thing on the right is a core, which basically approximates a little chunk of human brain. You've got SRAM as your memory. You've got neuron-like CPU process, and a huge amount of computing that's all for the networking, so that if you make a 64 by 64 grid of these cores on a single chip, that enables any core to talk to any core at any time. So you actually are becoming basically a synaptic process rather than a von Neumann architecture, which is the traditional computer architecture. We built one of these cores, literally a single one, just to see would it work. In 2011, it did. So we then built up a massive chip. And we're talking, literally massive, million neurons, 250 million synapses for memory, and 4,096 cores, 64 by 64, on a chip that size. This is non-trivial. It is about, give or take, 5 billion transistors. This is a big damn chip. But it mimics human function in the sense that, A, you can teach it. It's designed to be shown the answer as opposed to programmed for it. And it can actually work at human clock speeds, which is to say, effectively, kilohertz. If you have to go all the way down to that, fine. And it has a rather profound impact. This is where we tested it. All of the stuff to the right side is just support chips. The actual chip called True North is sitting in that socket. You'll understand a little later. I'll show you a thermal photo to make my point. And this is what it's capable of doing. It actually is analyzing. There's a 4 by 4 array, 16 of these chips, that has been taught how to recognize, each one recognize a different class of object. So if you have a car versus a person who's walking versus a bicyclist versus a bus, it actually successfully tracks each of them in this video. And it'll just do this ad nauseum. The point to it is not so much that it can do it, because there are video systems that'll do this. The point rather is what it's capable of for a given amount of power. The entire power there was 7.5 watts. That's only really because we didn't have full Synaptic chips to do it. The truth is it was only 2.5 watts of Synaptic power on the board to do this whole thing. 2.5 watts is nothing. If you want to do this with traditional technology, you'd be looking at a kilowatt. This is a game changer because think about it. If you have the Internet of Things, you have lots of cameras out there that people are looking for various things. Instead of sending the raw video data back, you actually send back only the data indicative of that's interesting versus that's everything and trying to handle it at the center. Because at the power levels here, you can actually work remotely. You can work on solar and batteries. You don't need kilowatts. It's a fascinating change, and you can see why. Somebody sent me this, said, by the way, Bernie, I know we've been telling you this stuff doesn't heat up. Let me show you. The chip on the left is actually true north. It's doing all the work. The stuff on the right is just the support chips that were on that board that you saw. My point is, again, thermally, this stuff eliminates the need for cooling. I mean, it's really pretty radical. And so this is magic. I mean, this is stuff we do not have a wonderful and robust programming system yet. I mean, there are all kinds of challenges, but it is coming because with this kind of a reduction in power, you're talking about a tremendous opportunity. All right, so I've gone through sort of the lower level stuff on technology. Let me take it up another level. What happens when data complexity and the velocity of that overwhelm us? Now, here's a bit of fun. So I walk into a client in New York and they say, hey, we've been having a problem. We've been having systematic failures of our network. I said, how much of it? They said, all of it. The entire global network of this operation collapses periodically, and they have no idea why. So you look at this and you say, you got to be kidding. And of course, each of those boxes can contain hundreds of systems. And you kind of scratch your head, say, this is going to be fun. It turns out it took a woman with an incredible mathematics skill, a Ph.D. mathematician who rewrote something called Granger causality to crawl backwards through the sucker. And after about 2 or 3 weeks of work, she actually then ran the system and was able to find that the original cause of these failures, which, by the way, had not been found for almost, I think, 3 years, was 65 minutes before the whole thing collapsed. There was an initial trigger event. 65 minutes. We tend to think in terms of microseconds. No. 65 minutes for this disaster to start and percolate around the world and eventually land on the system and kill it. The problem is this doesn't scale. We haven't got a lot of people with her skill in the world. You got to come up with better ways of solving problems like this because the complexity has exceeded our ability to deal with it. Of course, cyber. I mean, like I have to tell you guys, this might be an accelerating problem. I don't think I do. The last numbers for 2014, because I didn't update it, there were over 1 billion records breached. So we're getting into a sizable fraction of the human population of the Earth. This is not a good thing, and this is just getting worse and accelerating. Anytime you introduce a new technology, there are new risks. In 1 year, the malware operating against mobile went up 614% in one shot. I mean, we're talking about something where as soon as you say, I got a new toy, somebody says, hot damn, I'm going to exploit it. So the trick is trying to introduce guys to some of the new toys before they get here. Because we're going to need to worry about exactly this as these new technologies I'm showing you start to appear over the horizon. To overcome these things, we will require the help of AI. It is not enough, I don't care how good you are. The attacker on a 0 day, of course, may have had a year to develop the attack. You're sitting there and the first instant have to react. Good luck with that. I don't know about you, but I'm not good enough to, in the first half a second, come back and whack you. It's not 10 minutes. We started 10 minutes early. Go away. 20. Sorry, I'm getting heckled. So in any case, the only hesitancy I have about using the word AI is, you say AI, everybody sees Terminator. Or, the HAL 9000. Okay, how many people here know 2001, A Space Odyssey, Kubrick? Good, okay, so HAL 9000, we all do know the connection, HAL, right? You left shift the IBM one letter and you get, oh yeah, HAL. We've thanked him many times for that. And by the way, HAL goes on to murder everybody but one person on the crew of a spaceship. So I'm a little hesitant to use the word AI, but the fact is, that's what it does. I rather call it, accessible intelligence. Walk up to a machine, you ask a question, you get an answer. That makes me happier. But basically, we're talking about at a very basic level, cognitive computing. And this is something where if we don't use this, we will not be able to deal with the threats that are coming at us. A cognitive system is very, very different in how it goes about functioning. Traditional programmatic systems, right? Use conventional data sources. It follows rules. It's called a program. And same output for different users unless it was written by Microsoft. No, never mind. That's the last time I'll do that, I swear to God, until the next crash. Cognitive systems, you basically teach them. They actually learn and improve with use. They have sensory and non-sensory data inputs. They'll adapt to whatever you want. And they can relate to you as an individual because it literally is taught by you, so it will relate back to you in a similar fashion. But the real purpose is they scale. Humans don't scale. It ain't like, there's a lot of dark fiber in your head, you're going to throw a switch and light. Ain't going to work that way. A cognitive system basically works straightforwardly. There are multiple interpretations of a question. It goes through natural language processing, comes up with what it believes to be the actual question. It then will come up with hundreds of different potential answers. These hypotheses, though, are tested against tens of thousands of evidence sources. Not tens of thousands of bits of evidence, trillions, literally you can have petabytes of data it's tested against. But through learning models, it then narrows it down and gives you an answer with the statistical probability that it's correct. And that's nothing to do with search. I'll show you a couple of examples of this thing, assuming nothing goes particularly foul in the last hour that it was working. I'm going to show you a criminal investigation example, government service, and healthcare to give you some scale of what AI can achieve. Now, the problem with criminal investigations is obviously I can't use a real one or I'd violate all kinds of privacy rules, so I'm going to talk about Breaking Bad, which for those of you who don't know was an American crime drama. And fortunately, somebody who had a lot more time on their hands than I do, when this drama was over, they actually took all the data and they put it into Wikipedia. So we took Wikipedia and we fed it to a Watson system that's sitting in London, which I'm working on here in real time. And we also allow the system, we have another system we call I2, which will just use straight search, because I'd like to show the contrast between the behavior and what you can get out of it. So without further ado, and with hopefully a little bit of luck, let's see if this thing's alive. So I'm Agent Schrader from that particular show, and I've heard that there's somebody, fantastic, the GPU says I'll help, no thank you, not right now. Agent Schrader, you never know what'll happen. Agent Schrader, using typical search, will say, look, I heard on the street there's a new drug out there, it's called blue meth. So what do you got on blue meth? And it looks around, and search, being relatively stupid, says, okay, well, there's a guy, it turns out this guy, James Alkene, I won't read it out to you, he has a blue tattoo on his neck, we're not interested. But yeah, blue meth is in the system, which is good. And blue bloods, well, that came up because it's a motorcycle gang with the word blue in it, we don't need that. But we are interested in blue meth, so we're going to open that up, and there it is. Now, visually representing this, you say, well, okay, so this guy Jesse Pinkman came up. It turns out he was arrested for having blue meth in his possession. So, okay, that's fine. Who's this guy Heisenberg? He's the presumed manufacturer of the methamphetamine. It turns out that when you interviewed this guy Jesse Pinkman, he turned in, he said, look, there's a guy who calls himself Heisenberg. Okay, before somebody says, is that his real name? No, it's, as a physicist, Heisenberg, the uncertainty principle is his famous, claim to fame. But this is all you have by search. Now, if you go over to Watson and you say, all right, look, I want to ask you questions. Now, here's where you got to be really careful. You can ask a question like, who is Heisenberg? That is the dumbest damn question I could ask. You know why? Because it's read Wikipedia. You know what it's going to come back with? Nope. Okay, there we go, the Heisenberg group. That comes from Heisenberg, the physicist. It's a chunk of mathematics. It has nothing to do with, this show or anything else. You got to be careful. AI is only as good as the questions you ask. You ask a stupid question, you get a stupid answer. If you say, okay, who uses the alternative name Heisenberg? That might get a little closer. So again, it's crawling through the entirety of Wikipedia. Walter White, son of a gun. By the way, that is the guy who is Heisenberg on Breaking Bad. Now, that's 72% probability. Now, here's the interesting thing. Who uses the false name Heisenberg? And if you do that, you're being very much more specific, right? It's not the alternative. That name we know is not the guy's real name. Then it comes back, hopefully, with Walter White at 86% confidence. Now, if you really want to cheat, you can just say, who uses the name Heisenberg in Breaking Bad? It comes back with 100% confidence saying, I know who that is. We're not going to cheat. Okay. I can then ask it to annotate all that information, which it just finished doing. And basically, it's read everything there is to read in Wikipedia about Walter White and then followed all the places that there's a reference back to their source. The speed at which it'll run is, fairly impressive. And what you can do then is you can say, look, show me what you got. And so we're going to, there we go. it's got. I'll shrink that down. And the way it works is it'll basically pull up everything in a spider chart that it has on Walter White. And lo and behold, Walter White has some interesting things. For instance, he's a chemistry teacher. Isn't that interesting? You're looking for a meth cooker, and you got a chemistry teacher. Now, we haven't yet connected this person directly with Pinkman, the guy who's the only guy we have a direct connection back to, the drug. But I don't have to go, ask questions. I can just punch a button. We'll see if this will sort itself out fast enough. If it won't, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull up another instance that I already let sit. You have to kind of let this thing think for a while. Yeah, this is really connected. I'm doing this in real time, which is why I'm having so much fun. There we go. We're back. What it does then, in terms of displaying this, by the way, this is a live demo, which is always a lot of fun, right? This is where you say, I can predict pretty much that at some point the screen will explode and the machine will catch fire. I'm not doing canned demos yet. The last one is canned. I figured I'd get through the first two. The three, I can get away with canned, you'll forgive me. The point is that these two guys, not only are they connected, but they're like seriously connected. And they got lots of things between them. For instance, there's a murder that it refers to. And if you click on that, it'll dig through all the stuff that it's got in from the work that you've done already, the preparation that you've done inside of feeding, basically, Wikipedia into the system. And lo and behold, there you go. All sorts of additional people come up that you can interview. The point is, I'm pulling up amounts of data here that it would take years as a foot investigator to get, and I'm pulling it up in seconds. And that's really the only point here. One of the things about AI is it's not, Terminator. You're not going to wake up in the middle of the night as it disconnects your head from your body. It's about scaling the human ability so that instead of you spending years slogging and getting the same exact data, it can pull it up out of the ether in an instant. The scale is really what this stuff is about. So let me go on and go to the next one. All right, so we're going to shut this guy down and go back with a little bit of luck. Wow, I'm impressed. It's still alive. We'll go to the next one, Ask Jasmine. This is local. This is in Singapore. It's a live demo. The Ministry of Finance actually is using one of our AI systems, Watson, and it's using it to answer tax questions, mostly because you can abuse the hell out of it and it doesn't care. You basically can go and query it about taxation issues, and it will come back and say, okay, it's a beta, please don't shoot us. It's still in training, but we're actually letting the public basically ask questions, and we're using that as the methodology for training. And this is where you just, we lost the system. We're going to bring it back up and hope for the best. All right. With a little bit of luck, this will work. It's going to come up and say, son of a gun, Ask Jasmine. There you go. By the way, it is funny. Now, keep in mind, this is a Watson system, so I can always try something. Are you Watson? There's always a wise guy out there, and it says, I can answer questions you may have about income tax, which is the polite blow-off, right? That's like, go away, kid, I'm not interested. Okay. So, you can ask rational questions like, why must I pay taxes? Let's try that one. Son of a... Taxes are an integral part of nation building. Can I help you with another question? Okay, they've been doing their homework. Let's try some. That's a surprise. Okay, what is the largest gift I may give before it is taxable? Don't get your hopes up. Not for you guys. So are gifts for special occasions taxable? It comes back because it wants more data, and you ask the question. It says, yeah. Bereavement gifts, the whole amount is not taxable. For all other gifts, under 200 is not taxable, over 200 is. Done. That's the power of AI. Not only is it a damn good answer, but it's damn quick, and it involved a machine that never gets tired, doesn't complain, and you can curse it all you want, it doesn't care. So again, AI is coming along because the speed and accuracy with which it'll go is impressive as hell, but that's really not the end of the story. Let me show you sort of the most impressive part. I'm going to stop this part of the way through, but this will explain itself. This is done by, actually, I think this was MSNBC. So let me just run it, and no, it's Bloomberg actually, and I'll make a few points as it goes. All right, here goes nothing.
Watson, who is David McCullough, correct?
IBM's Watson, the technology that beat two humans on
Damn.
Jeopardy 2 years ago.
It didn't quite stop in time, so I'm going to just run it back a little bit.
The technology.
There we go. Watson, as you guys may know, played this game against the two best humans in history, and it won by about a factor of 3. However, Watson in that system was an 80 kilowatt system. 80 kilowatts. The human brain is about 20 watts. So these guys were at a 4,000-fold power disadvantage, and they got within a factor of 3 of the machine. Remember what I said about synapses, right? Synapse is a very efficient, the human brain is very efficient. These guys at a 4,000x disadvantage got within 3x of winning. Okay, so that's why you do synaptic processing in a nutshell. So let me go on and show you what...
That beat 2 humans on Jeopardy 2 years ago may be the technology that helps doctors beat cancer. Dr. Arthur Forney at WestMed Medical Group in New York is testing Watson in the form of an iPad app during its pilot phase. So here Watson was given a very unusual case, a young Asian woman, non-smoker, who has lung cancer.
So now you tell Watson to do its thing, and it's now looking at the data you inputted, the data from her imaging, from her biopsy.
In 17 seconds, Watson has analyzed about 3,500 textbooks and 400,000 other pieces of data.
This is the screen where it shows you that after looking at what you have so far, it would consider that you would do several other things for the patient that it doesn't see yet in the chart.
In an instant, Watson has figured out what caused this cancer.
It turns out she has a very rare genetic mutation, which is accounting for her cancer.
And offered 3 treatment options.
It has shown that treatment 1 has a 95% confidence of being effective, whereas treatment 2 is only half that.
Is this so obscure that you would have needed Watson for the diagnosis?
The answer is yes. This is so obscure that if you're basically a physician, you know how many papers a physician reads in a month? 5. In order to dig through and come up with this answer, it crawled through 250,000 journal articles, 3,500 textbooks, give or take, 61,000 clinical trials, and about 100,000 other data in 17 seconds. It's not that it is smarter than a human. There's a huge misunderstanding of what AI really is about. But it scales and it learns at a rate and pace we can't. So again, as Jeff pointed to correctly, the challenge of complexity and velocity that's coming at us is such that tools like this are inevitable. And if we don't use them, guess what? The bad guys do. You haven't got a choice. It's not like you can put the genie back in the box. So again, this is sort of at the north end. You know, like I said, I started really at the base technology. This is just some of the most sophisticated software you will ever see. But it is pretty revolutionary stuff, and it is finding very common mundane uses, answering tax questions, but it's also finding uses like this were spectacular. And, you know, this is really a project, we're not running this. This is Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Institute in New York. But it is damn impressive what's possible. So without further ado, what this leads you to is sort of a different version of, the future. First of all, it is turning out to transform healthcare. You're just seeing the beginnings of this. It's just warming up, as they say. But there are now new issues about both the bottom line and the front line. Sort of net, brute force technology has run its course. Ain't going to happen anymore. So because you now have such a level of innovation in architecture, structure, you're moving away from von Neumann architectures, you're moving into AI, you basically now have things like, agile computing, synaptic processing, consumable / cognitive systems. These are all elements that are not common today. Yet they will be common very shortly. And as they become common, you need to understand their strengths, their weaknesses, and how you defend them. Every new innovation creates value and progress, but it also has new risks. And frankly, the reason it's appropriate is you guys are at the front lines. Okay, that may be the bottom line, but you are the front line. I mean, it's critical that you understand what this new stuff coming at you is and how to address both the strengths, leveraging them, and the weakness. I mean, yeah, an FPGA, it can do encryption, it can do compression, it can do it at a speed that's line speed, so you never even see it. It's like a bump on the wire. But it can be attacked, just like anything else. They all have vulnerabilities. So we're counting on you guys to get ahead of that. So thank you very much. And now you get your break. Yeah. You seriously expect me to answer that?
Since it's a learning system, do you just give it bad data?
Ah, that's a great question. Yeah, can you attack an AI system by giving it crap data? No, that's the beauty of it. It just washes it out because there's so much data in the world that you couldn't put enough bad data in front of it that would have confused that with the right answer. It'll get over, Laetrile, right? You're going to grind up apricot pits and cure all cancers? Not so much. There are people who put it out there, but the truth is, if you look at these 700,000 other pieces of data, they all said it's crap. And so they ignored it. But that actually doesn't work. What I'm more worried about is getting underneath it and getting into the interface. For instance, it does natural language processing and messing with the interpretive. Yeah, that might work. I mean, so there are ways that you would worry about getting in and going after it. That's a great question, though. Yeah? Sure. By the way, I'm also sticking around because I'm determined to get my free cup of coffee. But go ahead. Watson doesn't play chess. We played chess with something called Deep Blue about 10 years ago and creamed Garry Kasparov. And since then, nobody's wanted to because getting beaten by a machine that's really considered old hat would be so humiliating, nobody wants to play. No, Watson isn't set up for that, but you could. But, interesting question. The answer is I have no idea. Never tried. Deep Blue was really, it was built for giggles. I mean, you could swamp it with capability today. That was an ancient technology. But I'm sure you could do the same thing with the system behind DeepMind, so I really don't know. I don't know. Sounds like a fun experiment.
All right, thank you very much.
I think they're gone. Yeah, my pleasure.